Hello, Geeks and Gamers. Matt Lemke here with your Gamer Goggles, gamer-goggles.com, and today we're going to continue with our role of character. This is, I don't know, I've lost track. I think it's part 6. And we're going to talk about the big 3. But before we do that, again, I'm just going to remind everyone that coming March 1st, I am going to launch a Kickstarter for Season 4. I need some new equipment and things like that. And I'm not going to bore you with that right now, but there's going to be a link to the Kickstarter real soon popping up all over the place on my channel. So if you like what I'm doing and you want to support it and you want to help us keep going, even $3 will help get us where we need to go. Anyway, enough of that. The big 3 are major events that have happened in your character's life that have, one way or the other, brought your character here. They could have been things that happened in childhood. They could have been things that happened as an adult if you're playing an older character. They don't have to, and when I'm saying the big 3, I'm not necessarily talking like natural disaster or a catastrophe or war. But they could be. It could be any of those things. It could be as simple as, let's say you're playing a cleric. It could be as simple a choice as that aha moment that led you to believe in that particular deity that has now effectively really shaped your life. Or maybe you're a fighter, which, by the way, man, where is that book? Oh, this book. Which, by the way, if you haven't purchased this book and you're a D20 player, it's a great book because of the way they approach it. Darn that cat. The way they approach the topic of faith and religion within role-playing. And where I was going with that before I interrupted myself and I saw the squirrel behind me was you could be a fighter, and it could be the reason why you chose to worship a said deity. Basically, that book gives you a tool, no matter what your character believes, to have faith. And that includes not having faith, because, well, faith is a belief. And that's another topic for another time. But it could be a decision as simple as that. And while we're on that little bitty topic of religion, you can understand, no matter who you are, how it might affect your thinking as an individual, and therefore you should be able to apply it to your character. You might not be able to apply it as to whatever you worship, in real life, the same way, because worshiping so-and-so isn't the same as worshiping the good Lord or Allah or Buddha. It's very different. And there's a lot more flexibility in it. But it could be, moving on to more decisions. It could be something like, as a kid, you were orphaned. So maybe you have a soft spot for children, and that affects your line of thinking throughout the adventure. It could be as something as catastrophic as war or a typhoon. There's no set number either. It doesn't necessarily have to be the big 3. You can make it the big 5. You can make it the big 7. The more you incorporate into your character, the more you're going to get to know your character even before you start playing. 3 is generally enough, in my opinion. That's a good starting place, because as the story matures and develops around the party, you're going to have to make decisions, and sometimes those decisions are going to come back. And if you have more than 3 to 5 items defining what you're going to do, as your character matures, you might find out that by the time you're 5th level, you've got 31 key events that have influence in your life. And there's nothing to say that some of those big 3 that helped you get to the point where you're at in life can't change. That's part of developing this whole inner conflict. Maybe you come to terms with being an orphan because something else happened as an adult while you're an adventurer. That's part of role-playing. It's about developing and growing this character. How boring would it be if your character just stayed at level 1 forever. Well, the character's personality and depth of perception from what other people see should effectively, for lack of a better way to say it, level up as well. The more experience you gain playing your character, the better you should become at developing and pushing out that wall. I mean, if you look at developing a character, when you first start out, you do all this work, and especially if you're doing it the way that we've been talking about, you do all this work, and you kind of start in a box, right? And then you level up, and you kind of push the walls out a little bit, and you keep getting more and more space because you keep developing it, and you keep forcing that out of your character. But it's not like you're just adding it on top. You're actually pulling it from the inner being of that personality because of the work you've done. And that is what's important about the big three. So let's say, well, we'll use my character Thalen. He's a rogue paladin, neutral good in Eberron. And as a child, his parents were both very busy doing top secret kind of work. Well, not always top secret, but his father was in the military, and he was almost always on tour. He was home for very short periods of time, so he didn't have a very big father figure in his life. That's one of the big three. His mother was a spy, which is how he became a paladin and a rogue. So you see how he entered into where he came into life when he was effectively a teenage boy. He is an elf. He rescued his mom from some people that discovered she was a spy in the city, and that is one of the things that helped develop the whole background with him being a rogue type, and the whole fighting end of it, it came out of him protecting children that were being bullies, so that led him into being a paladin. I could have done a lot of different things with him, but this character actually came out of the role we needed in our party, and the GM's like, well, Matt, you should kind of go ahead and explain how you're both a paladin and a rogue. So he wanted me to come up with the background, and that's how I came up with that background. We needed a fighter because at the time we started playing, we had 3 casters and 1 psionics. I guess we'll call her a caster as well, in our party, and my character is the paladin and the rogue. So we don't get into combat a lot. we would probably suffer a lot, but you get the idea, And as he was growing up, the DM used not as he was growing up. The DM used some of that personality information to throw some red herrings into our game. For example, there was one section where I kept hearing children's voices, so I had to go investigate it, which let the bad guy get away. I couldn't help but go help the children, and he's used the children trump card a couple of times. So it creates certain points where you have to think about what your character would do, not necessarily what's right for the party, but what your character would do. There was one time when the DM wanted the combat to be primarily for another player in the party, because for whatever reason he wanted him, I don't even remember, but he wanted him to fight this particular villain that we were facing. And I finished off the guys that I was in combat with because I had some rather good rolling at that point in time. He's like, yeah, I don't like when you do things like that. So as I'm approaching the combat, to enter into the combat, which would have probably made it way too easy for the caster who was in hand-to-hand combat, which, by the way, our caster's an orc with like a 20 strength. So it's pretty ridiculous. Anyway, what he did is he added descriptions to the scene, and there were children playing in the street, and it wasn't a carriage, a wagon was startled, and the horses started to run down the street towards the children, and the children were oblivious to being in the way, so my character had to deal with that, or the children would have been hurt, uh, which effectively removed me from the combat that he didn't want me in. And again, it all came down to the GM had that tool of, well, one of Matt's weaknesses, or one of Thalen's weaknesses, is the fact that he was an orphan as a child. You know, and it wasn't a hard decision for me to make. It was pretty simple. Those kids were going to get killed, you know. If they had been adults, I probably would have just screamed and told them to get out of the way. But I kind of swung in and did it. And that is the purpose of the Big Three. The Big Three are intended to give you a firm foundation of things that not so much your GM can use as a tool, but you can use as a tool to help direct and make decisions that your character would certainly make. I think, after doing things like this, that it's a lot better to have, what am I going to call them? We'll call them guideposts or map markers for your character's personality and decision making, rather than not having them, because you get into a situation where it's like, well, would he do this or wouldn't he do this? And then you might just have to fall back to alignment. And while we have talked about alignment, and I think alignment's a good tool, I think knowing your character's personality is a better tool. And then you can, once you know what your character's decision would be, you should use alignment, I think, to back it up or improve or refine that decision. Because it makes more sense that way. I know as a human being, I'm not necessarily impulsive, but I certainly think that I get an idea before I think it through. I just think that's natural. You get the idea, and then you think about it. And I think it's more natural to have the idea first, and then apply whether or not it's right or wrong. Because that just seems normal to me. Maybe it's not. I have been called a freak, and I'll accept that. I will accept that. Anyway, that's the Big Three. The Big Three are pretty important, I think, and they pretty much help define your character. I mean, they set you up to start moving down that road. Now, next week we're going to start talking about how a lot of these things start to come together. We might talk about career, but I think next week we're pretty much going to wrap it up. We're going to round it up. Thanks for watching. Matt Lemke with Through Gamer Goggles, gamer-goggles.com. And again, my Kickstarter's coming soon. Please check it out. Have a good day.